The ordinary world. In the heart of the bustling city of Ankh-Morpork, where the air was thick with the scent of roasted chestnuts and the clatter of carriage wheels echoed through the cobbled streets, a man named Sam lived a life as unremarkable as the cobblestones beneath his feet. He was a clerk in the city watch, a position that required more patience than combat skills and more knowledge of paperwork than swordplay. His days were spent in the dimly lit offices of the watch, poring over reports of minor crimes, lost cats, and the occasional suspiciously large number of stolen socks. His colleagues, a motley assortment of seasoned officers, eccentric wizards, and a man who claimed to be a former king, though no one could confirm it, often found him to be the most predictable member of the team. Sam had no aspirations beyond his job, no ambitions beyond the next promotion, which, if the previous ones were any indication, would likely be to a desk that was slightly less cluttered. He had no grand dreams of heroism, no desire to chase down criminals or fight off demons. He was content in his routine, even if it did occasionally involve chasing down a particularly persistent goat that had a habit of wandering into the watch's offices. He had a small apartment above a bakery that sold pastries so sweet they could make a grown man cry, and a cat that had once tried to eat his paperwork but had since learned that it was not a good idea. The city of Ankh-Morpork was a place of contradictions, where the mundane and the magical coexisted in a delicate balance. The watch was responsible for keeping the city running smoothly, even if that meant dealing with the occasional wizard who had lost his temper or a troll who had taken a liking to the city's libraries. Magic was an accepted part of daily life, though it was often more of a nuisance than a boon. Sam had never been particularly interested in it, though he had once been offered a position as a magical assistant, which he had declined on the grounds that he preferred his work to involve less incantation and more paperwork. Despite the chaos that surrounded him, Sam's life was, for the most part, predictable. He woke up each morning, went to work, dealt with whatever minor catastrophes the day threw his way, and returned home to his cat and his slightly overpriced pastries. He had no idea that, in the near future, his life was about to change in ways he could not yet imagine. But for now, he was content with the comfort of the ordinary, even if it was occasionally interrupted by the occasional goat. The inciting incident. One morning, as Sam sat at his desk, sipping on a lukewarm cup of tea that had long since gone cold, a letter arrived. It was not an ordinary letter. Its seal was a symbol he did not recognize, and the paper was of an unusual texture, almost like it had been written on the back of a dragon's hide. The letter was addressed to him, though the handwriting was messy, almost as if it had been scrawled in a rush. The message within was cryptic, filled with riddles and strange symbols. That made no immediate sense. It spoke of a journey, a quest, and a destiny that was not his own. Sam read the letter twice, then 3 times, and still it eluded him. He frowned, setting the letter down with a sigh. He had no idea what it meant, and he certainly had no intention of pursuing whatever mystery it hinted at. He had a job to do, and the last thing he wanted was to be dragged into some grand adventure that would only end in disaster. He had seen enough of those kinds of stories in the books he had read in his youth. Tales of heroes who had to save the world, only to end up in a worse situation than before. Yet, as he sat there, something about the letter gnawed at him. It was not just the strange symbols or the cryptic message that intrigued him. It was the feeling that something was missing from his life, something he had never noticed before. He had always thought that contentment was the key to happiness, but now, as he stared at the letter, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to life than the monotony of his daily routine. His thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of Detritus, one of his fellow officers, who had a habit of appearing at the most inconvenient times. "Sam, you look like you've seen a ghost," Detritus said, peering over his shoulder at the letter. Sam quickly hid the letter behind his back. "What are you doing here, Detritus?" he asked. "Just checking in," Detritus replied, his eyes still fixed on the letter. "You look like you've been reading something important." Sam hesitated, then decided to be honest. "It's just a letter," he said. "Nothing important." Detritus raised an eyebrow. "You don't look like you believe that." Sam sighed, knowing that there was no point in trying to convince Detritus otherwise. He had always found the man's intuition to be uncanny, though he could never quite understand why. "I don't know what it means," he admitted. "It's just strange." Detritus tilted his head, considering the letter. "Strange is never a good sign," he said. "But then again, strange is also the only thing that ever makes sense in this city." Sam chuckled, though the weight of the letter still sat heavily in his hands. He had no idea what it meant, but he couldn't ignore the feeling that something was about to change. Whether it was for the better or the worse, he wasn't sure. All he knew was that his life, for the first time in a long while, felt like it was on the edge of something new. The call to adventure. Sam sat at his desk for a long time after Detritus had left, the letter still in his hands, its strange symbols and cryptic message echoing in his mind. He had always been a man of routine, a man who found comfort in the predictability of his life. And yet the letter had unsettled him in a way that no other document ever had. It was as if it had reached into the depths of his soul and whispered something he had never heard before. He had no idea what it meant, but he felt a pull, a strange and undeniable sense that something was waiting for him beyond the familiar streets of Ankh-Morpork. He tried to convince himself that it was nothing more than a coincidence, that the letter was just another one of the oddities that came with living in a city where the mundane and the magical coexisted in a delicate balance. But the more he tried to dismiss it, the more the words of the letter seemed to haunt him. He had never felt this kind of uncertainty before, and it frightened him. That night he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the letter tucked under his pillow. He had always thought that the greatest adventures were the ones that came with a sword and a quest, but now he wondered if the greatest adventures were the ones that came without warning, without a clear path, and without the certainty of success. He had no idea what the letter meant, but he knew one thing. If he ignored it, he would never know. The next morning he made his decision. He would not let the letter slip away. He would find out what it meant, no matter how strange or impossible the journey might be. He had no map, no guide, and no idea where he was going. But he had something else, curiosity. He spent the rest of the day preparing for what he could only hope would be the beginning of an adventure. He packed a small satchel with a few essentials, a change of clothes, a notebook, and a pen. He had no idea if he would need them, but he had no idea what the letter meant. But he knew one thing. If he ignored it, he would need them. Better to be prepared than not. He left the office with a heavy heart, knowing that he was leaving behind the only life he had ever known. As he stepped out into the streets of Ankh-Morpork, the city felt different somehow. The familiar cobbled streets seemed to stretch further than they ever had before, and the sounds of the city seemed to echo in a way that made him feel both exhilarated and terrified. He had always thought of himself as an ordinary man, but now, as he walked away from the only life he had ever known, he felt as if he was standing on the edge of something vast and unknown. He had no idea where he was going, but he had a feeling that the journey would not be easy. He would face challenges, obstacles, and perhaps even dangers that he could not yet imagine. But he had also felt a strange sense of peace, as if he had finally found something that had been missing from his life all along. As he walked through the city, he passed by the watch headquarters, where his colleagues were still hard at work. He paused for a moment, looking back at the building that had once been his home. He had no idea if he would ever return, but he knew that whatever awaited him beyond the city would be something he could never have found in the comfort of his routine. With a deep breath, he turned away from the building and stepped into the unknown, the letter still tucked safely in his pocket. He had no idea what awaited him, but he was ready to find out. The journey begins. Sam's first steps beyond the city of Ankh-Morpork led him into a world that was both familiar and utterly alien. The roads that stretched before him were no longer paved with cobblestones, but with something that shimmered under the pale light of the sky. The trees that lined the path were taller than any he had ever seen, their trunks twisted in unnatural shapes, and their leaves glowed faintly with an otherworldly luminescence. The air was thick with the scent of something he could not name, something ancient and powerful, like the breath of a sleeping giant. He had no idea where he was going, but he knew that he had to keep moving forward. The letter had given him no directions, only riddles and symbols that had no clear meaning. He had no map, no guide, and no sense of where he was headed. Yet, as he walked, the path seemed to choose him, as if it had been waiting for him all along. As he ventured deeper into the unknown, he encountered creatures that had no place in the world he had known. A fox with eyes like molten gold watched him from the shadows, its tail flicking with curiosity. It spoke in a voice that was both sharp and melodic, as if it had been carved from the wind itself. "You are not the first to walk this path," it said, its words echoing in the stillness of the forest. "But you may be the first to understand it." Sam blinked, unsure of how to respond. "What do you mean?" he asked. The fox tilted its head, as if considering his question. "You carry a letter, do you not?" Sam hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, but I don't know what it means." The fox let out a low, almost amused sound. "Then you must learn. The journey you are on is not one of power or glory, but of understanding. You must see the world not as it is, but as it could be." Sam frowned. "That's a bit cryptic, don't you think?" The fox chuckled, a sound that was both unsettling and strangely comforting. "Cryptic is the language of those who seek to understand the unknown." With that, the fox turned and vanished into the trees, leaving Sam standing alone in the forest, the weight of the letter still in his pocket. He had no idea if the fox had been a guide or a trickster, but he knew that he had to keep moving forward. As he continued his journey, the challenges began to multiply. The path was no longer a simple trail, but a series of obstacles that tested his strength, his wit, and his resolve. He crossed a river that ran with liquid light, its surface shifting like a mirror that showed not his reflection, but images of his past, his fears, and his dreams. He climbed a mountain that seemed to stretch into the heavens, its peak hidden behind a veil of mist. He faced creatures that were not of this world, beasts that whispered in languages he could not understand, and shadows that moved without light. Each challenge tested him in different ways, forcing him to confront parts of himself he had long ignored. He had always thought of himself as an ordinary man, someone who found comfort in the familiar. But now, as he faced these trials, he began to see that he was not as ordinary as he had once believed. He was not just a clerk in the city watch, he was something more, something he had yet to understand. And as he continued his journey, he realized that the letter was not just a message, it was a key to something greater than he had ever imagined. Trials and growth. As Sam ventured deeper into the unknown, the trials he faced became more intense, each one a test of his strength, his wit, and his resolve. The first challenge came in the form of a river that ran with liquid light, its surface shimmering like the stars above. He had to cross it, but the river was not merely a body of water. It was a mirror, reflecting not only his image, but the fears and doubts that had long haunted him. As he stepped onto the surface, the river whispered his name, each word a reminder of the life he had left behind. He saw visions of the watch, of the familiar streets of Ankh-Morpork, of the cat that had once tried to eat his paperwork. The river's voice was not cruel, but it was relentless, forcing him to confront the parts of himself he had long ignored. Sam took a deep breath and stepped forward, his foot sinking into the water. The river's voice grew louder, but he refused to let it overwhelm him. He had always thought of himself as an ordinary man, someone who found comfort in the mundane. But now, as he faced the river's challenge, he realized that he was not as ordinary as he had believed. He was not just a clerk in the city watch, he was something more, something he had yet to understand. He had always been afraid of change, of the unknown, but now he saw that the unknown was not a place to be feared. It was a place to be embraced. With a final step, he reached the other side, the river's whispers fading into the wind. He had crossed the first trial, and though the journey ahead was still uncertain, he felt a sense of peace that he had never known before. The next challenge came in the form of a mountain that stretched into the heavens, its peak hidden behind a veil of mist. The path was treacherous, the rocks slick with ice, the wind howling like a chorus of unseen voices. Sam climbed, his muscles aching, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The mountain tested him in ways he had never imagined, forcing him to push himself beyond his limits. He had always thought that strength was measured in the weight of a sword or the speed of a horse, but now he saw that strength was something else entirely. It was the will to keep going, even when the world seemed to be against you. As he reached the summit, he found himself standing on a plateau that overlooked the world below. The mist parted, revealing a landscape that was both familiar and foreign. He saw the city of Ankh-Morpork, but it was not the same place he had left behind. It was brighter, more vibrant, as if it had been waiting for him all along. He had always thought that the world was a place of contradictions, but now he saw that it was a place of possibilities. As he stood on the mountain's peak, he realized that the journey had changed him. He was no longer the same man who had left the city behind. He had faced his fears, had confronted the unknown, and had emerged stronger for it. He had always thought that heroism was something that came with grand gestures and great deeds, but now he saw that heroism was something else entirely. It was the courage to face the unknown, to embrace the challenges that life threw your way, and to keep moving forward no matter what. As he descended the mountain, he felt a sense of purpose that he had never known before. He was no longer just a man on a journey. He was a man who had found something within himself that he had never realized was there. He had always thought that the greatest adventures were the ones that came with a sword and a quest, but now he saw that the greatest adventures were the ones that came without warning, without a clear path, and without the certainty of success. And as he continued his journey, he knew that the trials were not over. There were still more challenges to come, more obstacles to overcome, and more questions to answer. But he was no longer afraid. He had found something within himself that he had never known was there, and he was ready to face whatever lay ahead. The climax. Sam stood at the edge of a vast chasm, the air around him thick with an energy that made the ground beneath his feet tremble. The letter in his pocket felt heavier than ever, as if it were not just a message, but a key to something far greater than he had ever imagined. Before him, the path was blocked by a towering figure, a being of shadow and light, its form shifting like smoke caught in the wind. It was the antagonist, the embodiment of everything he had feared in his journey. The unknown, the uncertainty, the very thing that had driven him to leave the comfort of Ankh-Morpork in the first place. The figure raised its hand, and the ground beneath Sam cracked, sending a wave of energy through the air. "You cannot escape what?" "You are," it said, its voice a chorus of whispers and echoes. "You are not meant to be here, not meant to understand. You are just a man, a clerk, a failure, who has run away from the life he was given." Sam clenched his fists, his heart pounding in his chest. He had always thought that the greatest challenges were the ones that came with swords and battles, but now he saw that the greatest challenge was not the one before him. It was the one within him. He had spent his entire life avoiding the unknown, fearing the changes that came with it. But now, as he faced the figure that had been created from his own fears, he realized that he had no choice but to confront it. "I am not just a man," he said, his voice steady. "I am not just a clerk. I am not just a failure. I have faced the unknown, and I have come out the other side. I have seen the world not as it was, but as it could be. And I will not let you stop me now." The figure let out a low, guttural laugh. "You think you can defeat me? You think you can change what you are?" Sam took a step forward, the weight of the letter in his pocket reminding him of the journey that had brought him here. He had not come this far to be stopped by fear. He had come to understand that the unknown was not something to be feared, it was something to be embraced. With a deep breath, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the letter. The symbols on the paper glowed with a light that had never been there before, as if the letter itself had been waiting for this moment. He held it up, and the figure let out a cry of rage. "You think this will stop me?" it growled, its form twisting and shifting. "You think this is the answer?" Sam shook his head. "No, the answer is not in the letter. The answer is in me." With that, he stepped forward, the light from the letter illuminating the chasm around him. The figure let out a final, desperate cry, and then it was gone, consumed by the very thing it had tried to control. The ground beneath Sam settled, the air clearing, and the chasm behind him became a path that led to something new. As he stood there, the weight of the journey behind him, he realized that he had not just defeated the antagonist, he had defeated the fear that had held him back for so long. He was no longer just a man who had run away from his life. He was a man who had faced the unknown, who had embraced the challenges that had come his way, and who had emerged stronger for it. And as he stepped forward toward the unknown that still lay ahead, he knew that the journey was not over. But for the first time, he was ready for whatever came next. The return to the ordinary. Sam stepped back into the familiar streets of Ankh-Morpork, the weight of his journey still lingering in his mind. The city had not changed, but he had. He had walked through the unknown, faced the challenges that had once seemed insurmountable, and emerged with a new understanding of himself and the world around him. He had always thought that heroism was something that came with grand gestures and great deeds, but now he saw that heroism was something else entirely. It was the courage to face the unknown, to embrace the challenges that life threw your way, and to keep moving forward no matter what. He walked through the streets, past the watch headquarters, past the bakery where he had once bought his pastries, and past the city's many oddities. Trolls, wizards, and the occasional goat that had somehow managed to escape from the watch's offices once again. He had always thought of himself as an ordinary man, someone who found comfort in the mundane. But now, he looked around, he saw that the world was not just a place of contradictions, but a place of possibilities. He had spent his entire life avoiding the unknown, fearing the changes that came with it. But now, as he stood in the city that had once felt so familiar, he realized that he was no longer afraid. He had always thought that the greatest adventures were the ones that came with a sword and a quest. But now he saw that the greatest adventures were the ones that came without warning, without a clear path, and without the certainty of success. He had not come back to Ankh-Morpork as the same man who had left. He had come back as someone who had found something within himself that he had never realized was there. As he reached the watch headquarters, he was greeted by Detritus, who looked up from his desk with a curious expression. "Sam," he said, "you look different." Sam chuckled. "I suppose I do." Detritus tilted his head. "You look like you've been through something." Sam nodded. "I have." Detritus studied him for a moment, then said, "Well, whatever it was, I hope it was worth it." Sam smiled. It was. He had always thought that the greatest adventures were the ones that came with a sword and a quest, but now he saw that the greatest adventures were the ones that came without warning, without a clear path, and without the certainty of success. He had spent his entire life avoiding the unknown, fearing the changes that came with it. But now, as he stood in the city that had once felt so familiar, he realized that he was no longer afraid. He had always thought that the greatest adventures were the ones that came with a sword and a quest, but now he saw that the greatest adventures were the ones that came without warning, without a clear path, and without the certainty of success. He had spent his entire life avoiding the unknown, fearing the changes that came with it. But now, as he stood in the city that had once felt so familiar, he realized that he was no longer afraid. And as he walked through the streets of Ankh-Morpork, he knew that the journey was not over. But for the first time, he was ready for whatever came next. The resolution. Morpork. The weight of his journey still lingering in his mind, he realized that the world had changed, not in a dramatic, grand way, but in a subtle, almost imperceptible one. He had not returned to the city as the same man who had left, but as someone who had found something within himself that he had never realized was there. He had faced the unknown, had embraced the challenges that had once seemed insurmountable, and had emerged stronger for it. He had always thought that heroism was something that came with grand gestures and great deeds, but now he saw that heroism was something else entirely. It was the courage to face the unknown, to embrace the changes that came with it, and to keep moving forward, no matter what. The city of Ankh-Morpork was still a place of contradictions where the mundane and the magical coexisted in a delicate balance. The watch was still responsible for keeping the city running smoothly, even if that meant dealing with the occasional wizard who had lost his temper or a troll who had taken a liking to the city's libraries. Magic was still an accepted part of daily life, though it was often more of a nuisance than a boon. But now, as Sam walked through the streets, he saw that the city was not just a place of contradictions, it was a place of possibilities. He had always thought that the greatest adventures were the ones that came with a sword and a quest, but now he saw that the greatest adventures were the ones that came without warning, without a clear path, and without the certainty of success. He had spent his entire life avoiding the unknown, fearing the changes that came with it. But now, as he stood in the city that had once felt so familiar, he realized that he was no longer afraid. He had found something within himself that he had never realized was there, and he was ready to face whatever lay ahead. As he reached the watch headquarters, he was greeted by Detritus, who looked up from his desk with a curious expression. "Sam," he said, "you look different." Sam chuckled. "I suppose I do." Detritus tilted his head. "You look like you've been through something." Sam nodded. "I have." Detritus studied him for a moment, then said, "Well, whatever it was, I hope it was worth it." Sam smiled. "It was." As he stepped inside the watch headquarters, he felt a sense of peace that he had never known before. He had always thought that the greatest adventures were the ones that came with a sword and a quest, but now he saw that the greatest adventures were the ones that came without warning, without a clear path, and without the certainty of success. He had spent his entire life avoiding the unknown, fearing the changes that came with it. But now, as he stood in the city that had once felt so familiar, he realized that he was no longer afraid. He had always thought that the greatest adventures were the ones that came with a sword and a quest, but now he saw that the greatest adventures were the ones that came without warning, without a clear path, and without the clear path, and without the certainty of success. He had spent his entire life avoiding the unknown, fearing the changes that came with it. But now, as he stood in the city that had once felt so familiar, he realized that he was no longer afraid. And as he walked through the streets of Ankh-Morpork, he knew that the journey was not over. But for the first time, he was ready for whatever came next. Do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more stories. Hit the notification bell to be notified of new stories when they become available. Feel free to leave a comment and tell me if you enjoyed the story and want to hear more like it.